He thought it was just another business trip until two little girls called him Daddy. Ethan Rivers, a powerful CEO used to control and success, is about to face the one thing he never expected: the past. When a delayed flight leads to a life-changing encounter, secrets unravel, hearts are tested, and a forgotten love resurfaces with a twist. If you're ready for a story full of emotion, second chances, and the power of family, hit that subscribe button and join us for this unforgettable journey. Let's dive in. The airport lounge was quiet, cloaked in the kind of silence only luxury could afford. Dim lighting, polished floors, soft piano music drifting from unseen speakers. But Ethan Rivers, CEO of Rivers Global Solutions, stood alone by the window, utterly detached from it all. His flight had been delayed again, and for once he found himself unable to ignore the irritation bubbling beneath his calm facade. He checked his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. Time was money, and he had neither to waste. A billion-dollar deal awaited him in New York first thing in the morning, and any delay could send ripples through his empire. Still, the jet wasn't moving, and his assistant's voice over the phone had been far too apologetic for his liking. Ethan sighed and loosened his tie, something he rarely allowed himself to do in public. At 43, he was known for control of his company, of his image, of every room he walked into. He had been called cold, calculated, ruthless even. But what people didn't understand was that it took exactly that to build a global empire from nothing. He sipped his espresso, eyes scanning the tarmac beyond the tinted windows, and yet something about tonight felt different. Office. Like the air carried an omen he couldn't quite name. It was ridiculous, he told himself. Flights get delayed, schedules shift. He would arrive, close the deal, and move on. That was life. His life. Then a sound broke through the hush. Small footsteps, light, quick, almost playful. He turned. Two little girls, maybe 4 years old, were walking straight toward him. They looked identical. Golden curls matching pink coats, wide brown eyes filled with curiosity and purpose. They moved past the concierge, past the guards, as if they belonged there. Ethan blinked, unsure of what he was seeing. Perhaps they were lost. But then one of them stopped directly in front of him, tilted her head, and smiled gently. "Hi," she said softly. "Are you our daddy?" The words hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. He stared at the little girl, heart pounding, mind racing, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. She couldn't have said what he thought she just said. Could she? Before he could react, the second girl stepped up beside her and nodded. "You look just like Mommy said you would." And in that instant, Ethan Rivers' entire world began to fall apart, quietly, completely. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the two girls, frozen in place, heart pounding against his chest like a warning drum. The one who had spoken, her voice still ringing in his ears, stood before him with a kind of quiet certainty that made denial impossible. Her twin stood slightly behind, clutching a stuffed bear, eyes wide and expectant. "Excuse me?" he finally asked, his voice lower than usual, laced with disbelief. "What did you just say?" "You're our daddy," the first girl repeated. Her voice was gentle, almost shy, as if she wasn't entirely sure whether she had said something wrong. "Mommy showed us your picture, said you looked just like this." Ethan's blood turned to ice. What the hell was happening? He looked around the lounge, half expecting someone to jump out with a camera to yell that this was some twisted prank, a publicity ambush. But no one came, no flash, no laughter, just the quiet hum of the room and the hammering in his ears. His mind was already sprinting, calculating, doubting, defending. Was someone trying to manipulate him? Blackmail him? Was this some extortion scheme aimed at a wealthy, high-profile CEO? But then he saw it. The eyes. Those same deep, expressive brown eyes he'd once looked into every morning. The same eyes that belonged to the one woman he never truly got over, Lily Thornton. "Where's your mother?" Ethan asked, more breath than voice. As if summoned, a sharp cry echoed from the terminal entrance. "Emma, Zoe!" He turned, and time stopped. There she was, Lily. Her auburn hair slightly tousled, her breath uneven, panic painted across her face as she rushed forward. She looked older, yes, but more real, more human than ever before. Her eyes locked on his, and in that instant, 5 years collapsed into one excruciating heartbeat. "Ethan," she breathed. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. Lily reached the girls, kneeling down and gathering them protectively in her arms. "You can't run off like that," she whispered, brushing their hair back with trembling hands. Then slowly she looked up at him again. The air between them thickened. Memory, betrayal, heartbreak, it all rushed in like a tidal wave. "Lily," Ethan said, voice sharp, "you have exactly one chance to explain what the hell is going on." She opened her mouth, but no words came. Because the truth, the one she'd buried for 5 long years, was about to surface, and nothing could stop it now. Ethan stood motionless, heart roaring in his chest, eyes fixed on the woman who'd once been his everything, and then vanished like a ghost. Lily Thornton. Her name alone once carried the weight of his dreams. And now, after 5 years of silence, she was standing in front of him, with 2 little girls who had just called him Daddy. He took a single step forward, the fury finally catching up with the shock. "Start talking," he said, his voice low, razor-edged. "Now." Lily swallowed hard, arms wrapped protectively around Emma and Zoe. "Ethan, please. Not here. Not in front of them." "Don't play that card," he snapped. "You don't get to ask for conditions, not after what you did." The girls looked up at her, confused by the tension. Lily crouched and whispered something, and the twins slowly wandered to the lounge's reading corner, clutching their stuffed animals, casting nervous glances over their shoulders. Ethan's voice lowered, but the venom remained. 5 years, Lily, 5, and not a single word. You disappeared. No calls, no emails, no explanation. And now, I'm a father? Her eyes filled with tears, but she stood her ground. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," she said, barely above a whisper. "I left because I was pregnant and scared." The word hit him like a gut punch. Pregnant. "You found out after that night?" he asked, stunned. She nodded. "I was going to tell you, but before I could, everything unraveled." "What do you mean?" Lily closed her eyes briefly, summoning the courage. "I had debts. Stupid, reckless debts. After we fought, I got caught up with the wrong people, and when I found out I was pregnant, the threats began. They knew about you, your company, your image. They said they'd ruin you." Ethan's fists clenched. "So you vanished?" "I ran," she said, voice cracking. "I changed my name. I left the city. I chose to raise them alone, to protect you." Rage and heartbreak collided inside him. "You don't get to decide what I can handle. You stole 5 years of their lives from me." "I know," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I live with that guilt every single day." For a long moment, silence fell between them, heavy, suffocating. Then Ethan turned toward the twins again, watching them giggle over a picture book. They looked so much like her, and painfully like him. He wasn't ready to forgive, but he was done being absent. Ethan couldn't tear his eyes away from the girls, his daughters. The word echoed in his mind like a foreign language, something his heart understood before his brain could accept it. 2 lives, 2 entire worlds had existed without him. Birthdays, first words, first steps, all lost, stolen, erased. He turned back to Lily, anger simmering just beneath his skin. "You had no right," he said, voice shaking now, not with fury but grief. "You had no right to keep them from me." Lily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I wasn't thinking clearly, Ethan. I was drowning. I was alone." "You weren't alone," he snapped. "You just didn't give me the chance to be there." She didn't answer. What could she say? He stepped back, pacing slowly, dragging a hand through his hair. The control he was known for, the icy calm that made him a business legend, it was cracking. Do they even know who I am? Did you ever tell them the truth? Lily hesitated. I told them about you in stories, that you were strong, smart, kind. I didn't want them to hate you. Hate me, he scoffed. They should hate you for lying to them. They don't know it was a lie, she whispered. I couldn't tell them the full truth. How could I? How do you explain to two little girls that their mother ran away with them to hide from the man she loved? The words struck something deeper. Ethan's expression softened for a moment, not with forgiveness, but with raw confusion. You loved me? I never stopped, Lily admitted, eyes brimming again. But I didn't believe I deserved you. Not after what I'd done. Not after what I was dragging behind me. A heavy silence fell. Ethan walked slowly toward the reading corner where Emma and Zoe now sat, legs swinging over the edge of a plush chair. They looked up, curious, nervous, hopeful. Do you know who I am? He asked, kneeling beside them. Emma nodded first. You're our daddy. Mommy showed us your picture every night. Zoe added. She said maybe one day we'd meet you. And now you're here. Ethan's heart clenched. The weight of 5 lost years, of every missed bedtime story, every scraped knee he hadn't kissed. It all hit at once. He turned back to Lily, jaw tight. You don't get to fix this overnight, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Lily's lip trembled, and for the first time in 5 years she allowed herself to hope. The moment lingered, charged and trembling. Ethan stood, fists clenched at his sides, trying to hold himself together while the ground beneath him kept shifting. He had faced boardrooms packed with hostile investors, survived media scandals, and rebuilt empires from dust. But nothing could have prepared him for this. 2 tiny girls calling him Daddy, and the woman he once trusted more than anyone standing there, admitting to stealing 5 years of his life. His voice was low, broken. Do you know what you took from me, Lily? She looked up, startled by the fragility behind his tone. I missed their first words, he continued, their first steps, the nights they cried, the mornings they smiled. I missed it all, and you made that choice for me. I know, she whispered, arms wrapping tighter around herself. I've thought about it every single day. I've watched them grow, always wondering if I did the right thing, or if I destroyed something sacred. You did both, he said, eyes darkening. You protected them, maybe, but you broke me in the process. A silence thick with pain followed. Then Zoe's laughter floated across the room, light, innocent. She had climbed into a chair, hugging her bear, humming softly as she looked at Ethan. It was the sound of something pure, something untouched by the mistakes of adults. He closed his eyes. That sound didn't belong in a room full of wounds. Ethan turned toward Lily again, his expression now steadier. This can't be undone. We can't go back. But from this moment on, I will be a father to them. I don't care what it costs me or how complicated it gets. Lily's breath caught. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, she said quietly. I don't deserve it. He nodded once. You're right. You don't. But they do. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, pain, then relief, then something almost like peace. So what now? She asked. I'm flying to New York tonight, Ethan replied. And so are you. She blinked. What? He looked over at the girls. They deserve more than stories and half-truths. They deserve stability, a chance to know me. If we're going to fix this, we start now, together. Lily hesitated. She wanted to say no, out of fear, guilt, or instinct. But when she looked at Emma and Zoe, she knew. She nodded, and just like that, a shattered past began to take its first step toward healing. The hum of the private jet was low and steady, but inside the cabin, Ethan's thoughts were anything but calm. He sat across from Lily, the polished table between them like a cold, invisible wall. The twin girls had fallen asleep on a nearby recliner, their heads leaning together, breathing in sync, a mirror of innocence that neither adult felt worthy of. Ethan watched them quietly, his heart tangled in 1,000 conflicting emotions. There was awe, yes. There was warmth, undeniable. But buried beneath it all was still the sting of betrayal and the weight of a decision that couldn't be reversed. Lily sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her shoulders tense, gaze fixed out the window at the night sky. She hadn't said much since boarding, neither had he. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I didn't expect you to forgive me, but I didn't think you'd offer this." Ethan didn't answer at first. He rubbed a hand over his jaw, eyes still on the girls. "This isn't forgiveness, Lily. Not yet. This is responsibility." Her face tightened at that, and she nodded slowly. "You've taken care of them," he added. "That much is clear. But you robbed them of me, and you robbed me of them. I can't pretend that doesn't matter." "I don't want you to pretend," she said, almost pleading. I didn't know if you'd ever want them. Or me." Ethan turned to her, finally meeting her eyes. "Don't confuse this for a second chance at us," he said, calm but firm. "I don't know what this is yet. I only know I can't walk away from them. Not now." A flicker of something crossed Lily's face. Pain, maybe. Or just the realization that the man in front of her wasn't the same boy she'd left behind. "They don't know the full story," she murmured. "Not yet," he replied. "But they will. When the time is right, they'll hear it from both of us." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it was less suffocating, more resigned. Emma stirred in her sleep and whispered something unintelligible. Zoe shifted, reaching out blindly in the dark. Ethan stood, walked over, and gently pulled a blanket over them both. He sat beside them for a moment, brushing a lock of hair from Emma's cheek, his expression softening. Lily watched, her chest aching. For the first time, she saw it clearly, not the CEO, not the stranger, but the father. And maybe something in him had changed. The Manhattan skyline greeted them like a glowing fortress, sharp, cold, and impossibly high. As the jet touched down at the private terminal, Ethan couldn't help but feel like he was landing in a life that no longer entirely belonged to him. He had built everything within those towers, his legacy, his name, his control. But now, disembarking with Lily and 2 daughters he hadn't known existed, everything felt unstable, unwritten. The car ride to his penthouse was quiet. Emma leaned against his side, thumb in her mouth, already half asleep again. Zoe clung to her, stuffed bare, eyes wide, silently watching the glittering world outside. Lily sat in the front, stiff, bracing herself for the weight of it all. The apartment perched above Central Park was sleek, glass-wrapped, and clinical. Every object had its place. Everything gleamed. And yet the moment the girls stepped inside, chaos bloomed like wildfire. "Whoa!" Zoe cried, running toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "We're in the sky!" Emma giggled, spinning in the living room. "Mommy, it's like a castle." Lily smiled faintly, but Ethan stood still, hands in his pockets, watching the scene like a man caught between 2 worlds. He'd bought this place for solitude, for silence. Now it was echoing with laughter that didn't belong here, but somehow made the place feel less empty than ever before. As Lily unpacked a few essentials, Ethan tried something new, something unfamiliar. He sat down on the floor. "Emma, Zoe," he called gently. They turned. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "These aren't toys," he said with a soft smile, "but there's something important." He opened it to reveal 2 delicate silver bracelets, each engraved with their initials. "I had these made a long time ago," he admitted, "before I even knew you existed." Lily froze in the hallway, breath catching. Zoe's eyes lit up. "They're ours." Ethan nodded. "Now they are." Emma stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his neck without hesitation. "Thank you, Daddy." That word, spoken without fear, cut through him in the best and worst way. Lily turned away, tears forming again. It was too much, too soon, too real. Later that night, when the girls had fallen asleep in the guest room, Ethan stood by the window, city lights flickering around him. Lily approached quietly, arms folded. "You're good with them," she said. "I'm trying," he answered. She nodded, barely above a whisper. "They already love you." He didn't reply, because the truth was, he didn't know if he could survive loving them back and risking losing them all over again. Days passed, but the air in the penthouse never truly settled. From the outside, everything appeared perfect. Two little girls giggling through marble hallways, a mother moving silently through a space too polished to feel like home, and a father who was still trying to remember how to breathe around them all. Ethan did everything right. He arranged for private tutors, scheduled pediatrician visits, even ordered new beds for the guest room that the girls quickly claimed as their own. His staff adapted quickly to the new dynamic, too quickly, almost mechanically. No one dared question the sudden appearance of two children in the life of Manhattan's most impenetrable CEO. But at night, when the lights dimmed and the city softened outside, the silence returned. Heavy, dense, waiting. Lily would sit alone on the balcony, coffee mug cold in her hands, eyes scanning a skyline that had never felt so far from safety. She hadn't been in Ethan's world for half a decade, and even then she'd only stood on its edges. Now she was living in its center, with two little girls fast asleep a room away, and a man who barely looked at her anymore. Ethan, for his part, didn't know how to look. He'd catch himself watching Lily in passing, brushing Emma's hair, folding Zoe's socks with impossible care, and something would stir in his chest, something dangerous, something fragile. But the second she turned, he'd look away. One night as he passed the kitchen, he heard her whispering, to herself, or maybe to the guilt. "I shouldn't be here," she said softly. "This isn't my world. It never was." "You're not the only one thinking that." Ethan's voice startled her. She turned sharply, finding him leaning against the wall. His eyes were tired, hollow. "Then why did you ask us to come?" she asked, not accusing, just weary. "Because they're mine," he answered, "and because part of me hoped we could make this work." Lily swallowed hard. "Make what work, Ethan? This apartment isn't a home. We're not a family, not really. We're trying, but we're not whole." He stepped closer, close enough to see the regret carved into her face. "I don't want to fail them," he said, voice cracking, "but I don't know how not to." A beat passed, then Lily whispered, "Neither do I." And for a single breath, the wall between them didn't fall, but it wavered, enough to wonder if it could be rebuilt. The following morning, the penthouse was filled with quiet. Not the peaceful kind. This was the kind that came before something irreversible. Lily sat at the edge of the breakfast bar watching Emma and Zoe color at the dining table, sunlight pouring over their little hands. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her suitcase sat by the door. Ethan entered the room, his jaw tense, tie slightly askew, like he'd been fighting something all night, and lost. "You're leaving?" he asked flatly, staring at the bag. She didn't turn. "I was never planning to stay forever." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, voice sharp. "You can't just take them and walk out. Not again." Lily stood now, arms folding across her chest. "This time I'm not running. I'm offering a choice. For them. For you." "I already made my choice when I brought you here," he snapped. "I'm trying, Lily, every single day. And so are they. You can't just erase that." Her voice trembled. "I see how they look at you, Ethan, like you hung the stars, and maybe you did, for them. But this life?" She gestured around the cold, beautiful room. "It's not a childhood, it's a showroom." Ethan took a breath, trying to steady himself. "Then let's change it. Let's find something real. Together." She blinked, startled. "Together?" "I can't raise them in boardrooms and corner offices," he admitted, "but I can build something else, if you're willing." Lily's guard faltered just for a second. And what about us? Or do we just exist as co-parents in separate corners of the same house? Ethan looked at her, really looked this time. I don't have answers yet. I only know that when I see them smile, I don't feel like a CEO. I feel like a father, and I want that more than anything. Tears threatened to spill down her cheeks. I want it too, but I'm terrified, Ethan. I don't know if we can fix this. Maybe we don't have to fix everything, he said softly. Maybe we just start again. The girls giggled behind them, Zoe holding up her drawing. Look, Mommy! Look, Daddy! We drew our family! And there it was, 4 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Ethan stepped forward and knelt beside them. Is this who we are now? Emma grinned. We hope so. Lily met his gaze. And in that moment, it wasn't certainty they found, just the courage to try. The sun dipped low over Central Park, casting golden light through the wide windows of Ethan's penthouse. But the space no longer felt like the sleek, sterile fortress it once was. There were crayons on the floor, a forgotten sock on the couch, and laughter echoing down the hall. For the first time in years, Ethan Rivers wasn't thinking about deadlines, stock prices, or shareholder meetings. He was lying on the living room rug, his tie tossed aside, Zoe curled up on his chest, fast asleep. Emma was sitting cross-legged beside him, telling him a long-winded story about a unicorn, a spaceship, and a dancing bear. He wasn't sure he understood the plot, but he was listening like it was the most important thing in the world. And maybe it was. Lily stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, not out of defensiveness, but peace. Watching them now, it was hard to believe that just a week ago she hadn't known whether Ethan would ever speak to her again. Now he was here, holding their daughters, letting go of control, choosing connection instead. Later that night, when the girls were asleep and the apartment was still, Ethan joined her on the balcony. The city sparkled below them, alive with noise and movement, but up here it felt quiet, still. I don't know how to do this perfectly, he said, but I'm not going to stop trying. Lily smiled. That's all I ever wanted. They didn't kiss, they didn't hold hands. But something passed between them, an understanding deeper than old romance. It was something built on forgiveness, growth, and the raw beauty of simply showing up. I used to think love was about intensity, Ethan admitted, but now I think maybe it's about consistency, about showing up even when it's messy. Lily nodded. And about allowing yourself to start over without needing to erase what came before. They stood in silence for a while, 2 people learning to breathe in the same rhythm again. Inside, Zoe stirred in her sleep and mumbled, Daddy. Ethan closed his eyes. He had missed so much, but he was here now. That was enough. Maybe this wasn't the fairy tale they'd imagined years ago. Maybe it never would be. But it was real. And sometimes that's more powerful than perfect. Because life doesn't give you rewrites, but it does offer redemption. And in this new chapter, they weren't chasing what they had lost. They were choosing what to build next, together.